For two men charged with last month's murder.
The men remain in custody in Northwood and are expected to return to court in November.
Officers responded to a report of a collision involving two pedestrians and a Honda Fit.
Radio Cayman. Your voice, your choice for today's biggest news.
Money Sense is brought to you by the Chamber Pension Plan. For further information, visit chamberpension.ky.
Are you looking for a rewarding way to make a difference in your community while gaining skills in strategy and leadership? The Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan is seeking volunteers to join their Board of Trustees. Representing all sectors of the Cayman Islands' economy, volunteer trustees are vital to providing quality pension services and play an important role in protecting member benefits. If you would like to become a volunteer trustee or request further information, visit chamberpension.ky, email admin@pensions.ky, or call 745-7630. The Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan. We're here for you.
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community.
A very good morning and warm welcome to Money Sense. I'm Simon Caudery and I'm delighted to be joined in the studio this morning by Professor Mirco Kovach. Professor Mirco Kovach is a professor at Imperial College London and director of the Laboratory of Sustainability Robotics at the Swiss Federal Laboratories for Material Science and Technology. Professor Kovach, thank you for joining us and discussing with us about robotics today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Look, you build robots on a daily basis. You research robots on a daily basis. You research what the future of robots is going to be. So I suppose perhaps the first and obvious question is, what are the trends that you're seeing in robotics? What do we need to know about robots that's coming down the pipeline?
Well, I think one of the first trends is that robots are here to stay. So robotics is not going away. AI, robotics will be combined and will truly transform our lives and how we do work, how we live, how we engage with technology in general. So when I started at Imperial College London in 2012, I started to build up the aerial robotics laboratory, so trying to develop drones. And the general consensus was, or the general discussion around the topic was around military drones or privacy concerns, and this is where the field was, about sort of as toy drones and military drones. But now I think about 10, 11 years later, we are in a different place. So now if you think about the Gartner hype cycle, right, it was this hype inflation of expectation that happened in the 2010 to 15, maybe I would say, in the drone space. But now it starts to be the performance phase. So robots, and particularly drones, are being involved in day-to-day industrial processes. And I think this is a very powerful trend. It's a trend that we cannot ignore, also a trend that we have to ask ourselves how to engage with that, how to support it, how to use it, and so on.
So this is rather like the stories we hear recently that Amazon is trialing drones, air drones, to actually place people's parcels where they need to be, maybe to deliver medicine to different places. So that's why you're saying it's becoming more mainstream as opposed to it's just used by the military or in the research capacity.
Yes, and drone delivery was one of the early use cases that have been presented by the industry or society at large, and many of those projects have not taken off. So we still don't have pizza delivery, for example, in a city at large, so on a large scale.
We have people on scooters instead, which are sort of drones with people on them, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's ground-based drones with people on it. Yeah, but I think it depends on the scale up of the technology and where the use case comes in. For example, delivery has been a very successful application for blood deliveries in Rwanda, for example. So there's a project run by Zipline, for example, that delivers blood samples or blood supplies extremely quickly, especially in environments that don't have very good ground infrastructure. So this is an example where the initial expectation of pizza delivery wasn't delivered at large, but other things have emerged that have really benefited society a lot, I would say.
How much of aeronautical drones, when you're doing the research and what they look like, how much of that is governed by research into the natural world, or how much of it is humans recreating something? Because drones don't look like birds, so to what extent, presumably some evolution has meant that birds have got the optimal way of flying. So why do we have drones designed in the way they look today?
Well, thank you very much for asking this question. It happens to be my core research field that I'm really interested in, so I might be biased, but I think that this lifelike capability of robots, or taking inspiration from animals and building those principles into the robot, I think is really key to make systems that are robust to environmental unpredictability, or can move through unknown environments or engage with changing environments. And I think these are capabilities that still are not existing so well in the robotics world. So we have a lot to learn from the biological world itself. So I wrote a paper about that, where we talk about this bio-inspired robot design paradigm, which describes how to do this.
What's the limiting factor then? Is it, we hear a lot of, when you talk of anything to do with electronics, and robots use electronics, batteries are often a limiting factor. Is that a key constraint then in the robotics industry, the fact that batteries are still older generation, they don't last so long, or is there some other constraining factor, materials perhaps?
I think energy, as a term or as a topic, is very much a constraining factor. Materials as well, and also behaviors, I would say. So energy, materials, and behaviors. And for all these three areas, we can take inspiration from nature and look at ways how nature deals with that. For example, if you look at birds, for example, they use different strategies to optimize the energy consumption. It might be better batteries, so better muscles or fat storage and so on, so if you think of it as a battery. But it might also be soaring flight, or it might be intermittent locomotion, so perching to something to observe the environment and flying again. So like these strategies, different strategies can be used also in robotics that greatly enhance the limitation of energy that we have to deal with the world, which every system has to deal with as well.
How much, when you do this research into drones and flying objects, how much do you wish that new technologies, new materials, or new power supplies were available? Do you have a vision of things that you could do if those sorts of constraining factors that exist today were no longer constraining factors? Is there a paradigm difference of what could be done?
I think that's a very important question, and I don't think that this happens by itself. So we cannot rely on just waiting until this paradigm changes. I think we have to actively engage with this paradigm and think of ways how we can do multidisciplinary co-evolution of the disciplines to make those types of lifelike robots. So we call this, in a paper that we wrote also in 2020, we call it physical artificial intelligence, which is a paradigm or a methodology of how to co-evolve the materials with the controllers, with the chemistry, and with the biology to create those lifelike robots. I can give you an example maybe.
Yeah, please do.
So, for example, if you have a robot, so you build a robot that can fly inside of fire. Now, if you want to build that, of course...
Inside of fire?
Inside of fire, like
okay.
It's a fire drone.
Yeah.
And it can operate very high temperatures and like this observe the environment, look for survivors in a fire case, for example, work with firefighters. And so we wanted to do that, but for that we had to develop new types of materials alongside the controllers and the mechanical design. And so we developed together with partners a aerogel material that is a polyamide aerogel that has embedded glass fibers that are then giving the capacity for the material to be a structural material that is very strong and lightweight and has a very high heat insulation. And because of that, we are now having this fire drone that can fly in very hot environments. But this didn't happen by applying the material science to the robot. It is a co-evolution of materials and robotics to create those types of robots.
So you're sort of saying that these things need to work together. I still sense that there seems to be, we're on the cusp of something, and it's, what is it that's going to take us over that cusp so that robots suddenly are not everywhere, but in a lot of places? We all watch a lot of science fiction, I'm sure, and we see these things where robots are taking away some of the menial tasks or improving our productivity or improving our standard of living, our quality of life, and they seem to do it so effortlessly, and yet robots today don't look so effortless. So what is, when you look at this, what crystal ball would you like to say, what would you like to be able to change overnight what would make such a big difference for you?
I think a lot is on the innovation, on the robotics itself. And this is not just the software or the algorithms, it's also the design and the way how robots are built, how they're engaging with the environment, for example. So, for example, the current paradigm is very much that drones take pictures, and then it's interesting to do something with those pictures. And of course, there's a lot of use cases around that. But drones will, in the next stage, also engage with environments. So to do repair tasks, sensor placement tasks, measuring the thickness of paint, for example, or corrosion on infrastructures. And this paradigm of physically engaging with the environment, with the unpredictable environment, together with humans as like co-workers or extensions of humans that reduce the risk, reduce the cost, and improve the time or like increase the speed of operations. I think this paradigm of thinking like that and thinking of an ecosystem of robots and humans together, I think is the breakthrough that is needed. The technology will follow, but the society, I think, needs to recognize and support those healthy use cases.
Interesting you say the joining together of humans and robots, because it strikes me as though so much of today's conversation in all circles is artificial intelligence, about what computers can do without the need for humans to assist. And so are we in a scenario where we still need humans for this sort of interaction that you talk about, or could there be a pathway where actually artificial intelligence delivers a better solution in that respect?
So it's a complicated question, because artificial intelligence or the need for humans comes back to decision making and autonomy. And so how much decisions can be done by an algorithm or robot, or are humans needed for that? And this really depends on the particular use case. And I think technologically a lot will be possible, and a lot of autonomy or ability to engage with the environment and move robustly and reliably can be done by the robot. But I think the mission level autonomy, so defining what the task is or what the purpose or the mission is, I think this will still be done by humans, because humans have a more integrated intelligence, and an intelligence that can recognize the subtleties and unpredictabilities based on things that are not only from the past, but that are connecting to the core of humanity. A robot still doesn't have that, will not have that, and I think it's an illusion to say that AI will just replace all of this.
So you have some optimism that we'll still, as sentient beings, have some use.
I absolutely am optimistic, but I'm also a technology optimist. I would say that robotics and AI can support us to be better humans and do the life supportive initiatives faster, cheaper, and with more reliability.
Do you get worried about, when you build all these robots and you think about robotics, do you get worried at all about it?
Well, I think as a field we need to be worried about it, in a sense that we have to define what we should and should not be doing. So, for example, when I grew up in the 90s, I remember the debate around genetic engineering and cloning and so on. And so, can we clone humans? Technically it might be possible, but the humanity has decided that it's not okay to clone humans, right, for some reason. And so I think in robotics, the same should happen now, and we need to think about what robotics and AI should be doing and what not. Where are the limits for us as a humanity, and how do we want to engage with that? I think this is still missing.
Well, look, we are going to take a short break, but do stay with us as we continue our conversation after the break with Professor Mirco Kovach. And I promise you, ask him whether he's worried about Terminator. So join us again after the break.
Are you looking for a rewarding way to make a difference in your community while gaining skills in strategy and leadership? The Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan is seeking volunteers to join their Board of Trustees. Representing all sectors of the Cayman Islands' economy, volunteer trustees are vital to providing quality pension services and play an important role in protecting member benefits. If you would like to become a volunteer trustee or request further information, visit chamberpension.ky, email admin@pensions.ky, or call 745-7630. The Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan. We're here for you.
This is Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community. Brought to you by the CFA Society Cayman Islands.
And now, more Money Sense.
Welcome back to Money Sense. We are going to continue our conversation with Professor Mirco Kovach on robots. And as I preluded before the break, I will ask him whether he's worried about Terminator taking over. But in the same vein, Asimov created these laws of robotics, which sort of resonate, I think, with a lot of people as to being important, that humans are at the pinnacle of the apex. Is that something you talked about before we went on break? You talked about the importance of having rules or guidelines in which robotics operates. So how important are those sorts of guidelines and rules then in your everyday life and in what robots can be doing?
I think it's very important to think like this and think of the limitations of what should and should not be done by a robot. And I think another aspect of this, which is often not discussed very much, is the bias that humans might have once they have access to this technology. So, for example, AI has been shown to be extremely accurate in predicting cancer based on CT scans and so on. And so now if a doctor looks at these scans and has an AI prediction of a certain probability of cancer being or not being there, how much time is then taken to double check that or to engage in an old school way with the data? And I think my prediction, I don't know how this will happen, but my prediction is that it will be less and less, and that their trust into these high performance systems will increase.
But that increases the risks. If something goes wrong, it will go wrong in a much more magnified way. Because as you build up more and more trust, you accept things that you might miss things that previously you might have corrected. So then when an error happens, it could be an error of much more magnitude, couldn't it?
Yes, exactly. And I think that's the risk is also there. It's not so much the technological risks of what the technology can do and cannot do. It's the bias risk of the human engaging with it, or the, let's say, inertia or laziness, if you want to call it like that, of the human not taking the steps to control or double check it. And I think this needs to be looked at as well, and the processes need to be adapted accordingly.
Do you ever worry about bad actors using robots in this Terminator sort of way for bad or for bad things? And is there anything that can be done in the sense that people who build cars, other bad people use them for bad things? So is it just the fact of life? That's what we are as humans. There will be bad actors who will use these tools in nefarious ways, or is there some way of building safeguards into these tools?
I think it needs both. The technology needs to be made safe. There needs to be regulation that kind of regulates the use of how it's used. And there is a big responsibility, of course, also on the user of how to engage with the technology. So I think generally everything can be misused, right? If you're creative and you invest your energy and time into bad uses of technology, I think there is a lot of space there. But I think what we need now is not so much a hypothetical assumption of how bad it could get. We need also showcasing the positive uses, so the hopeful applications, something that gives or opens the opportunity of what is possible that is good about it. And if you then give energy into those positive and life supportive use cases and applications, then I think we benefit as a society a lot.
When I was making the introduction of you, I noticed that a phrase in there was sustainability robots and robotics in that sense. Obviously, sustainability in climate change, in all other sorts of pollution matters, is something that is quite reasonably having a lot of attention paid to it and a lot of anxiety amongst humanity. Are robots going to potentially able to help us solve some of the really major geo problems that we have, or is the technology just not quite refined enough? Would it have been nice to have had this 20 years ago? Are we too late for this to make the real difference that we need it to, or is there optimism in you for this?
No, I'm very optimistic. And one example of that is that last year in 2020, there was the COP conference, that defined the biodiversity goals for 2030. And so this they called also the Paris moment for biodiversity, so like the Paris agreements for climate change now coming to biodiversity. And the goal is to create, for example, one of them is to protect 30% of land by 2030. Now this is an enormous number, so it's very ambitious to do those goals that have been defined. And I think robotics and AI will have a key role to play in that. The question is, can we reach this without AI, without robotics, without automated processes to plant trees, to collect or monitor biodiversity, and to quantify the effect that certain initiatives have? And my assumption and my statement, I would say, is that we cannot. I think we depend on the advances of robotics and AI to achieve those goals in biodiversity, but also in climate change, carbon, net zero emissions, and so on.
So that's interesting you say that, because you said a couple of things there, like using robots to plant trees. Never even thought of that as a concept. There must be other ideas, and I'd love to hear some other thoughts you have as to things that robots perhaps are already doing that we don't know about, or things that robots might be doing in the future, just to spark some ideas in people to say, hey, well, I think I heard you mentioned at the beginning robots are being used in fires. Well, someone listening to this from the Cayman Islands Fire Service might be saying, maybe we should have one or two of those for when we're searching out for people in buildings. What sort of ideas can you give us as to how robots are being used?
Yeah, so another example is something that we are now spinning off as a startup idea is the capability to have a flying robot that engages with the infrastructure and measures the paint thickness.
The paint thickness?
The thickness of paint on, let's say, a storage tank or offshore wind turbine, for example. And this seems like a kind of trivial task or like small task, but it's a huge task because it allows us to predict the corrosion and the damage of the asset. And by doing that, we can, let's say, extend or paint before it breaks down, before there's a leak. So we protect it from pollution, so we reduce pollution, but we also extend the lifetime of the asset. If you can do this by 5 or 10 years, we don't need to buy or build a new asset, which has enormous cost savings. We also can reduce the downtime of the asset. So instead of having it down for 3 weeks to repair it or measure it manually, we can do it in 1 day. So suddenly the asset is much more useful. And it's also the usage of the kind of how fast it can be done. So it's all together that comes together, and this is an example of how robotics can help in general, is to reduce the time of something being done, the risk of a human having to climb up or go inside of a storage tank, and the kind of data that can be collected. And I think there are many other use cases that are like that, where robotics can really make a step change, like a tenfold increase in productivity and cost savings, for example.
What about inside our homes? Do you see robots in the near future doing some of those rather boring, trivial tasks that we all have to do? I mean, we have those, the Roombas, the things that go around your floor and try to kill you as you're walking around the house. But are there other things that you see on the horizon that might be used within the homes by everyday people?
Yeah, I think there are many examples of that. I mean, the Roombas, I bought one and it didn't seem very dangerous to me.
Did you then take it apart and make it into something even more dangerous and exciting?
No, but there's a lot of research around that to do it fully autonomous and map the home as well and optimize the process. And I think there's big innovations that are coming in this field, in the field of home robotics. But also, and this is something important I would say too, is the engagement with the aging society. So assistive robots for keeping, so that people can stay at home for longer. And when people are at home, when they're closer to family, the life quality changes, improves a lot, and the cost on the overall society and the health system can also be kept lower. And so I think there's a lot of benefits to have robots or automation built into our life, everyday life, at home as well, and like this make our world a safer and more beautiful place.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we can't talk about robotics without probably discussing how does one get into robotics. It seems as though intuitively, in order to get into the robotic field, one has to either have a particularly skillful knowledge of mathematics, because there must be some mathematics in there, must be equations somehow, or one needs to be a very skilled engineer, which needs some mathematics, or one needs to be an incredibly excellent builder of devices, which is again quite a unique skill. Is it a difficult field to get into? How do you encourage people to say, hey, this is for everybody, or is it not for everybody perhaps?
I think it can be for everybody. And it depends who you are, of course, right? If you're a child, right, you can engage with it quite easily. You can do your 3D printing of components. You can use Arduino electronics and like disassemble different kind of robotic prototypes. And this is very accessible. So drones also can be programmed. There are maker spaces all around the world. But if you're an investor, then also you can engage with it. You can invest in startups. You can engage with the technology and really bring value, support initiatives you believe in. And as a general society, I think it's the using of it as well, but it's mainly the support. So trying to get to the core and to the positive life supportive use cases, as I said before. So believing in the good of technology, and this I think will open many doors.
So imagine there's a 10, 12-year-old listening to this broadcast and say, hey, I like the idea of designing these robots that are going to reduce pollution, or they're going to help stop spillages and therefore help keep our environment safer and cleaner. What do they need to study? What do they need to be studying at school to then be a student on one day of yours at Imperial College and studying robotics and helping you design the next sort of things? What do they need to be paying attention to?
I think it is the typical STEM subjects like mathematics, physics, and you can study mechanical engineering or computer science, physics even, or chemistry. So today robotics is very interdisciplinary and you can get into it from different sides. To end, maybe what I would like to say is that robotics is still a tool. It's not about the robots, it's about the mission of every human. So what is it that your heart yearns for? What is it that you can contribute to the world? And how can you use robots for that? Does robotics have a role to play in this? And how can you best engage with it? And I think this is an important question, and I think the robotics and the technology and the tools will follow very naturally.
I guess every researcher in every field always says that they'd love more funding for their research. But in all seriousness, do you think that governments around the world are giving enough attention to this area? Because to your point, if you don't think you can solve climate change COP goals without these sorts of tools, then it seems vitally important that research is funded to help get us to those sort of places. Are you happy with the sort of funding that global governments are providing? Are you seeing the support that you need in the research fields?
I think there's a lot of funding around for robotics and AI from industry, society, but also from governments. The COP goals have also promised $700 billion per year to support those goals. So it's a quite large number that can, I think, and will support a lot of those initiatives, and they will be then leveraged with investment and different tax incentives. So supporting startups, of course, can help a lot to bridge the gap from fundamental science into the applications, because a lot of the innovation today in this field, I would say, is driven by startups. So university startups that just get their grasp around taking some technology and bringing it to a product, to the market. And I think this valley of death still today is a valley of death. So anything that can help to bridge that, I think, will help a lot.
Excellent. Well, look, I think we're very close to running out of time, as we always are on our radio show. So I'm just going to briefly wrap up. So thank you very much, Professor Mirco Kovach, for joining us on Money Sense this morning. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed the conversation. I haven't quite got an answer from you as to whether Terminator is going to take over, but you said you're optimistic about the future, so I'm assuming that's a no. Again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. And as always, just before we do go, a reminder that Money Sense will be available on the CFA Society Cayman Islands website. It will be linked in and on YouTube for replaying. Simply search for us as Money Sense Cayman on YouTube. We also have later on today our CFA Society Cayman Islands annual investment forum. That's at the Kimpton at 12 o'clock this afternoon. So if you haven't got a ticket yet and you fancy listening in a bit more detail to Professor Kovach and other presenters, then do come along to the Kimpton later today at 12 o'clock. We'd be delighted to have you. With that, it remains for me to say thank you once again for tuning in and joining us on Money Sense, and please do tune in again in 2 weeks' time.
Money Sense is brought to you by the Chamber Pension Plan. For further information, visit chamberpension.ky.
Are you looking for a rewarding way to make a difference in your community while gaining skills in strategy and leadership? The Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan is seeking volunteers to join their Board of Trustees. Representing all sectors of the Cayman Islands' economy, volunteer trustees are vital to providing quality pension services and play an important role in protecting member benefits. If you would like to become a volunteer trustee or request further information, visit chamberpension.ky, email admin@pensions.ky, or call 745-7630. The Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan. We're here for you.
The voice of the Cayman Islands.
89.9 FM in Grand Cayman and 93.9 FM in Cayman Brac and Little Cayman.